suffering for my brother's bad judgment.
So here's a story from when I was 19. The funny thing is, it doesn't really stick in my memory as a scary moment until I stay in a caravan. Then, when the lights start going off, it usually comes flooding back. So, for a bit of context, my older brother, as dearly as I love him, is a bit of a dipstick. He's one of those people who goes through life on instinct, but the snag of his instincts are generally terrible, and it gets him into lots of scrapes. Every so often, one of those scrapes ends up involving me. One thing he kicks ass at is driving. Our dad's a mechanic, so since my brother was a preteen, he's been fixing up and racing a certain model of car. Well, the racing didn't start till he was a teen, but still, he's never made much money from it, but as long as he's kept in fags, weed, and booze, he's a happy bunny. Historically, I've never gotten on with his girlfriends. This is in part down to the difficulties I've had befriending other girls throughout the earlier part in my life, but mostly because my bro has a knack for picking up complete head the balls. So when we're chatting buzzed one night and he told me he thought his new girlfriend Chantel was the one, I decided to drag myself back up north to meet the poor unfortunate. I can be pretty judgmental, and when I met Chantel, I formed a snap judgment that she was no different to his usual fare of crazy. She had the look he goes for, permatanned, platinum blonde girl with huge jugs crammed into a tracky top. Her nails, you can tell a lot about a girl from her nails, were cherry red witchy things, bolted on with glue and far too long to allow you to do anything practical. As I entered our living room and saw her, she was pecking away at the screen of her smartphone like a bird, trying to text. She barely acknowledged me as my brother introduced us, and I think the look I gave him said it all, because before long he was nervously chattering away about anything and everything he imagined we had in common. I made all the effort I could after a 4-hour drive, but she and I could barely hold a 2-sentence conversation together. When my dad called me into the other room, Storage Hunters was on, and offered me a beer, I all but sprinted out the door. "What do you think of Chantel?" he asked, casting me the sidelong glance he uses when he expects me to go off on one. I belched at him and left it at that, not really knowing where to begin. "You know your brother is pretty taken with her," he says. At this point I pull what my family call Sam's iguana look, where I continue to face the TV, but look at my dad to my side. "What do you want, Dad?" "Well, you could go with him to his race this weekend." I pretty much spat my drink out at that, since his race was in Scotland, and I'd just finished my long-ass drive. Come on, it means so much to him. Nan didn't take to her, and you know what he thinks about your ma's opinion. Admittedly, this should have been a red flag. My Nan is like a bullshit-seeking missile, and she's old enough that she doesn't give a fuck. Just picture Olenna Tyrell from Game of Thrones, but Irish and constantly carrying a pack of 20 Regal in her bra. But I'm sentimental sometimes, and my big bro is such a massive fanny that my opinion probably is quite important to him. My dad senses my hesitation and presses home the advantage until I'm cramming my luggage back into my car, along with my brother's gear and Chantel's Barbie pink suitcase, which I'm pretty sure is big enough to serve as a viable alternative to the Soyuz capsule. While I probably shouldn't get further off topic, I'd like to point out that it later emerged the reason my dad wanted me to go so badly was because he had a lady friend coming round and didn't want to get his end away. Anyway, we take the trip up. My bro leads the way while I follow in my battered old Golf, making painfully awkward small talk with Chantel in the passenger seat as she pecks away at her phone. The first 2 hours are unadulterated hell, but eventually we start to talk a little more, and when I mention that I'd recently been dumped by my boyfriend, she actually switches off the screen and consoles me. She makes me feel better by putting some music on, and we bond over a shared love of the McFly busted oeuvre. By the time we get to my brother's friend's place in Scotland, we're getting on really well. The place we're staying in is one of those fixed caravan sites. I believe they're called trailer parks in the US. It's a little dingy, especially since holiday season is mostly over and people are leaving ahead of the site closing for the winter, but at the same time, the setting is beautiful. We get set up inside. Bro and Chantel will get the bed. I will get to hear them knobbing from the converted sofa, and since light is fading and Chantel is complaining about not having 3G, my brother decides to take her to poker night at the local pub. I stick around the caravan because I knew I'd get separated from the others and probably cornered for some awkward conversation with a pervy old man if I win. They haven't been gone for much more than an hour when Chantel starts texting me. The penny drops at this point that this is her thing. I don't know if it's FOMO or just generally being bored with her surroundings, but I figured that at any one time she's probably texting 4 or 5 people. I don't mind. There's fuck all on TV, and with just my music playing in the darkness, give me a break, I was being emo. My thoughts keep drifting back to my boyfriend, so I'm feeling sorry for myself. Her texting style irritates me a little. She keeps using text speak, but sending really long messages, and 'cause the signal's patchy, they keep coming through either incomplete or in the wrong order, leaving me to piece together what she's talking about like I'm in Memento or something. She also does this weird cross-eyed, tongue-out emoticon at least twice per message. After a while, she talks about how the game's getting good and stops sending messages. Right as I'm drifting off to sleep, I get a call from an unknown number. I decline it out of hand. I've had the same number since I was 15 and made some very poor choices with which companies I gave it out to. Then, almost immediately, the same number dials again. At this point, I get pissed off. The boyfriend who ditched me has developed a habit of getting drunk and then calling me looking for an easy shag. I decline the call again and ignore the voicemail. A short while later, I'm jerked out of sleep by Chantel. She's texting again, asking if I'm still awake and if my bro left the keys to his car in the caravan because he can't find them. I say yes and ask how the poker tournament went. She says, "Very well. Which caravan is it again?" At this point, I'm rolling my eyes, presuming they are rat-assed. "The one with the model of my brother's car outside, you daft bent," I reply. Over the music from my earphones, I hear a noise. It sounded like a man's laugh, but not my brother's. I'm pretty sure that's what I heard, but it's isolated as fuck out in this campsite, and my heart's starting to race, so I stand up and go to the door. I can see fuck all through the peephole, like it's literally black. There's just no light pollution out here. but as I pull the earphones out, I can hear someone crunching around in the gravel. I damn near shat myself when my phone vibrated in my hand. Another text from Chantel. Let me in. For some reason, this was the point where my standard alone in the dark scaredy catness turned into full-blown fear. I think it was because the footsteps I could hear were way too heavy and were trying to be way too quiet. My brother's quite light-footed, but a loud drunk, and I just know I'd have heard him and Chantel coming from a mile off, or my bro would have impersonated a werewolf or something that would have utterly failed to put the shits up on me. He's also like a fucking homing pigeon, and there's no way he'd have needed telling which caravan it was. I looked down at Chantel's last few texts and saw the difference in style. Shorter, capitalized, no annoying derp smile. I stood frozen in the darkness. I've no idea for how long. I figured that they were after the car, hence asking about the keys. My mind then ran through a detailed CSI-style post-mortem of them finding my body, riddled in stab wounds and bukkakied to death. I was wondering if it was just theft I had to worry about when my stream of thought was interrupted by a series of bangs and a snapping noise like a whip crack. Suddenly, I can see light through the peephole. I'm in full flight or fight mode now, so it takes me a while to lean forward and look through it again. The security light of the caravan opposite is on, but the door beneath is warped and bent from being forced open. I can see one of them rooting around inside while the other stands by my brother's car. Then came the words, "The girl's not here." As usual with me, flight won over fight. Pretty much as soon as I heard that, I went into the bathroom on the far side of the caravan and pushed the window open. I was sure they'd hear the noise I made getting out. First, my shoes squeaking against the fiberglass. I think that's what caravans are made of. Then the crunch as I landed in the gravel. But I didn't stick around to figure that out. I bolted into the raised woodland behind the caravan. Not far, but far enough that I had to feel blindly ahead of myself in case I walked into a tree. Once I was completely disorientated, I waited. I waited there for a long time until I heard the first crash of another door being broken, and no more than a minute later, the sound of screeching tires. I never came out until I heard my brother calling for me. Even then, I waited until I could see they were alone. I damn near throttled him when Chantel told me he'd been bragging all night about how he was going to use his poker winnings to buy new brakes for the car he raced. Being the doting older brother, he was absolutely livid that I'd stood by while his car had been pinched and not taken his keys with me for a jolly little game of cat and mouse with some criminals in the woods. I've no idea how I got mentioned at this poker night, but I'm very glad my brother's now wife texts like a child on morphine, and that my scumbag ex dumped me so I could mope in the dark. Wish I could say this is the first and last time that my brother nearly got me killed, but it's not. More to follow one day, if I can be asked. Thanks for reading.
Always lock your doors.
I work on a small dairy farm in the upper Midwest. It kind of has a weird layout, but I'll try my best. Right when you walk in, there's the milk house. Then you keep going and you're in the parlor. Once you go to the edge of the parlor, you can turn left into our calf barn, or right and make your way out to the big barn where the milking cows are. Also, I should mention that the calf barn is connected to an older barn that we keep pregnant cows in. The doors are never locked because we have people coming in at random times throughout the day. Plus, it's a barn, and there are doors literally everywhere, and I mean everywhere. Anyways, I'm a female who is fairly tiny, maybe 5'5", 120-ish pounds, and mind you, I'm still in high school. One night I was working the night shift, so anywhere between 8:30 and 2 a.m., because you never know how long barn might take sometimes. Every shift we work with one other person, and this night happened to be with another high schooler about my age, but she's a bit taller than me. But every shift we milk the first pen, then I'll go into the calf barn and turn the lights on and start the pasteurizer so I can feed calves. So I went and did that, and nothing seemed out of the ordinary, and I went back to help milk the second pen. After the second pen, I went to feed calves. So here's the layout of the calf barn. There's an alley down it with the weaned calves on the left and hay and grain on the right for feeding. Then at the end of it is a big room. There's a row of 7 hutches right as you walk in from left to right, then 2 in the left corner. Then there is 6 pens, 3 on each side with a little milk house in the middle for feeding purposes. The doors to the milk house are always closed to keep it warm in there, so I go in there and start my normal feeding routine, still not noticing anything strange. Then I open the door on the other side of the milk house to feed the far pens, and that's when I noticed the older, almost weaned calves in the right pen were very skittish. I ignored it at first and went about what I was doing, and then I saw him. A man, huddled in the corner of the pen, just sitting there, in all black and bundled up because it was cold as hell out that night. But he sat there just looking at me, smiling. In between those 2 far pens is a double door that again isn't locked, making it easy for someone to get in. Anyways, I was holding a 5-liter bucket filled with milk, and I dropped it, spilling it all over the ground, and I never booked it so fast out of there. I told my coworker what happened, and we hid out in the break room for a little bit with our barn dog. We eventually got the courage to go back and check it out, but the man was gone, and the double doors were wide open. Thinking back, we should have called the cops on him for trespassing, but he never threatened us or the cows, and nothing went missing. I don't know if he was a homeless man looking for shelter in the cold or what, but my barn is a tad far out of town for that. What scares me most is that when I walked in there, more than once that day, I still didn't even notice him, so I have no idea how long he had been watching me. I've worked 2 night shifts since then, and I work another one tonight. Since then, I've been sure to scan the barn and lock the doors while I'm feeding. So a note to everyone, not even just farmers, always lock your doors. And to the creepy man in one of my calf pens, let's not meet.
Update.
Hey guys, here's a little update on the guy that was in my barn a bit ago. I did see him again, but I'll get to that. Plus, some of my coworkers have noticed some things. So I worked 2 night shifts again this past weekend, and there are certain doors in the barn that can't lock, even if I want to do so. I just have to be extra cautious about it. One of those nights I got there early in hope of maybe getting off before midnight. That being said, I was the only one there for a little bit. Stupid, I know, but I was tired and thought it'd be nice to have a head start. I went out to the big barn to get the first pen of milking cows. I just remember feeling overall uneasy. It might have been just me being paranoid given the previous situation. Well, that night I thought I saw someone lurking in the pasture in which we had the heifers in earlier. I couldn't see because it was dark, but I swear I saw that all familiar smile with the little light I had coming from the silos. But I figured I was hallucinating, being a little skittish, so I brushed it off and went into the barn. I almost had the first pen to the parlor when my coworker showed up. We continued the night as usual, and then I had to go start the pasteurizer. Of course, I didn't want to, but I had to. I went in there and the calves seemed fine. Everything seemed perfect. I looked around. Not hard enough, you'll come to find. And everything was good. I went back to help milk the second pen. After that pen, I went to feed the calves while my coworker went to get the third pen like usual. Like I said, everything seemed fine. I was probably in there for around 20 minutes feeding the hutch calves bottles, which typically takes longer. And we had 6, so it took a little bit. Then I went to the far pens where I saw the man last time, and everything was okay. Then I went to feed the middle pens, and that's when something didn't seem right. One of the calves was laying down and refused to get up to eat, so I hopped the fence to help it up. Just a note, I set the pail of milk on the ground in between the 2 middle pens. I turned around once I got the calf up, and there he was. This time he was standing and still smiling. I still couldn't really see his face because it was covered, but he was wearing the same clothes, which was weird because it was 60-something degrees out that night. He wasn't overly tall or big. He just had a really creepy appearance and smile. He didn't say anything, he just smiled. I have a knife on me for work purposes, usually to cut baling twine. So I pulled that out just to have it, and then I jumped the fence again and ran back to the parlor just as I had the last time. I was working with the same girl, and me and her literally locked ourselves in the break room again and called our boss. He got there and we went to the calf barn again, and everything was just as I left it, except for one thing. The milk pail that had previously been filled to a mark on it was now empty, and the milk was all over the ground around it, but the pail was placed back upright. My boss didn't know what to tell us, but he stayed at the barn for the rest of the shift. My other coworkers started reporting things going missing, cows being moved, lights turning on and off, doors being left open, and milkers being turned off. One even said that the man was sitting in one of the empty calf hutches, and they didn't realize it wasn't a calf until they went to feed it, and he was just smiling at them. The cops had been notified, and we now have a cop parked by the barn every other night, and one that stays in the area at all times. I don't know where he was when I checked the barn before I started feeding because he wasn't in that pen. I checked. He definitely has some sort of hiding spot that I didn't see him, or he was moving around the milk house as I walked through it or something. But this guy really creeps me out, and lately I've been turning down night shifts. I'll keep you guys updated on how the cop thing works out, and if I ever see him again. This whole thing just really freaks me out because I love my job and the people I work with, but I hate being afraid to go to work. So to the guy who keeps showing up in my calf barn, please never come back, and let's never officially meet.
Final update.
I want to start off by saying thank you for everyone's concern over what's going on. Everything's beginning to come together. So anyways, since the last update, the same things have been occurring, like things going missing, cows being moved or let out, just things like that, and just the overall feeling of being watched. Plus, there's been a few mastitis cases recently because people have been half-ass milking to get out of their fast. One thing that stood out to me most was one night I was feeding and used my knife to cut some baler twine and set my knife on a bale while I was spreading some of it out. I guess I forgot to grab my knife before I went back in to milk because at the end of my shift I realized I didn't have it, so I went back for it, but it was gone. I kinda brushed it off and thought maybe I dropped it in the hay while I was feeding and one of the cows swallowed it. Since it is common in cows to swallow equipment because they don't chew, hardware disease, and I was kinda just like, shit. But I called my boss and told him, and things were good except that I no longer had a knife. So let's cut to tonight. I have only just gotten home, so it's close to 2 a.m. right now, which normally I'll get home around midnight if we're talking average, so it's been eventful. Anywho, I went to feed the calves, and as I walked through the weaned calf alley, I noticed hay coming through the ceiling and some shuffling. The hay loft is directly above the alley. I kind of ignored it and went about what I was doing, thinking maybe it was an animal like a mouse or even a cat. I was in the calf room at this point, and all of a sudden a full 45-pound hay bale just gets thrown off to the side of the loft, which I could see from an opening to the right of the hutches. Those bales were nowhere near the edge where they could fall, so that bale was clearly thrown. It was around 11 p.m. and I was scared shitless. I went and got my coworker who was a guy in his 20s and we went up to the loft. We were only up there for not even a minute before we saw the man. He had kind of made a little makeshift house or fort with the hay bales and was just sitting there staring at the ground. He must not have noticed us, but we got out of there and called the police. They got there within 20 minutes, and so did our boss. They caught the guy who we later found out was a 53-year-old male who spent the last 20 years in a mental facility, only about a half hour from the barn. He was released by his family against medical advice sometime about a month or so ago and went missing shortly after. He had been living in the barn all this time. I'm not sure what he'd been eating or how we hadn't noticed him or anything in the loft previously. I suppose he was hiding toward the back of it. But we finished chores while the police continued to search the barn, and the thing I found most unsettling is they found my knife clenched in his fist. It's a pocket knife, so it was probably easy to miss. I don't know how messed up he is in the head or what his intentions were with my knife, but I'm also glad I will never have to find out. He is also now legally considered a threat to society, and his family no longer has the authority to release him from the facility. My coworker, boss, and I were finally allowed to leave around 1:30 a.m. after they found everything they needed, so I'm hoping that's the end of that. So, to the mentally insane guy who's been living in my barn for the last month, Let's not meet again.
House broken into while I was inside.
This happened less than a month ago. I'm a petite female in her 20s. I'm currently living in Mexico to escape life a little after post-grad in a city that's not known as a dangerous place. A lot of foreigners live here, and I haven't heard any safety concerns. I'm living with my cousin who works from 8 a.m. to 7 p.m. The houses are in a pretty good area with a school, a nice hotel, and a Starbucks within walking distance. Just to give you an idea of how unexpected this was, this incident happened while my aunt was visiting us from Mexico City. She stayed home all day with me while I usually studied or watched Netflix. On this day, I was planning on having a chill day since I had woken up around 11:30 a.m. I'm watching something on my computer when I start to hear some loud pounding, like someone was working on something with a hammer. This was around 12 p.m. I thought my aunt had let someone in to repair something. I was under the assumption my aunt was still in the house, so I wasn't too worried and continued to watch my show. The hard noises stopped, and I heard two male voices talking casually. This made me feel more confident that they were there to fix something. I get up from bed to fetch my phone. I don't have any service plan down here. To message my aunt on Facebook to see what was going on. I didn't get a reply from her, so I just took it as she was busy. I go back to lying in bed, not thinking anything of the noises. 5 minutes later, I hear footsteps coming up the stairs. Take in mind I'm lying in bed with my back to the door when the door opens and I see a man. He was a pretty normal looking guy with facial hair and was dressed rather clean. Like if you saw him in public, you wouldn't think anything negative about him. As soon as he saw me, he shut my door and went downstairs. Then I heard another huge noise that I later realized was him slamming the front door. My room is the first room directly above the stairs, so my first thought was this repairman accidentally opened my door. I thought he was trying to get access to our patio. I was a little confused, but again didn't think anything of the situation. I slowly walk down the stairs calling for my aunt's name, but I get no response. As soon as I make it down the stairs, I hear my aunt in a panicked voice saying, "They just robbed us. They took the TV." She forgot to lock the first iron door of the house, which made it easy for them to break open the second door. I'll attach pictures. She said that when she was walking by from the store, she noticed someone by the house. She asked him what he wanted, and he said he was looking for a teacher. Then he got into the car with the other man, and they left. She didn't notice the TV in their car or anything suspicious until she got to the house. She mentioned that someone had rang the doorbell before she left to the store, and when she went to check, no one was there. She believes they've been watching her and my cousin, so when they opened the door to my bedroom, they were caught off guard and dipped. It's just really frightening to think about what could have happened if they didn't get scared off by seeing me. The cops came and were telling me that they often kidnap girls or rape them. I know I got lucky. Here's a link to the pictures of the door that was tampered with.
The man in my new house.
Today I took my mother-in-law, Carol, to look at the house my husband and I bought with my dad, Irv. It's on a huge piece of land and the house needs a ton of work, so it's currently unoccupied. I take her through the maze of rooms and poorly thought out extensions, explaining what we want to do to correct the weird nooks and crannies. As we're finishing up the vision tour, we're upstairs in the loft looking at the snowy woods and hear what could be footsteps, but possibly something else. I told Carol not to worry, it's probably an animal or house sounds, and we continue chatting. Then we definitely hear distinct footsteps and I hear a man's voice. Since my dad knew we were coming, I just assumed he came in on his cell phone and was wandering the lower level. As Carol yells, "Hello, Irv, hello, we're upstairs," my subconscious alarm bells are freaking out. That is not my dad's voice. I look at Carol and just say we need to leave, now. Luckily, the loft has a spiral staircase, so you get a pretty decent view of what you're walking into. We fly down the steps, open the sliding door, jump into my car. I call my dad to tell him what happened and that I'm calling the cops. 3 cops show up and search the house. Nothing. At this point, the cop starts asking us questions. What door did you use to get in? Where did you walk outside? Who knew you'd be here? Etc. My dad is there as we tell them again exactly what we did and heard. My dad cuts Carol off. Are you sure you didn't go in through the sliding door too? No, it was definitely in the side door, out the sliding door. Why? That door is broken. The lock sticks. You shouldn't have been able to get out unless it was already open. Awesome. I'm still absolutely freaking out as the fight or flight adrenaline is wearing off. One of the cops offers to do a perimeter walk. It's important to note that where I am got snow today and the powder was fresh. Cop comes back to tell me there are steps leading into the basement. Can't get into the main house from the basement as far as I know. Takes another cop, searches the basement and comes back. Nothing. I confirm that there are in fact footprints leading into the basement. Yes, there are. They try to reassure me that no one was in the house. Like freaking hell there wasn't. We both heard the steps. The second that voice registered as not my dad's, every hair on my body stood up and I was ready to GTFO. It's the first time that's ever happened to me. So, creepy footprint leaving phantom man? Let's not meet.
My first time home alone.
I will try my best to make this story short and concise. This happened when I was a child, around 11 to 13 years old. This was probably around the 5th time I was left home alone. Usually it was for a few hours or so, and not into nighttime hours. This night was different. Though they weren't planning on leaving me alone overnight, rough weather, what I believe was actually just intoxication, led them to staying at a hotel in a city about 200 miles from my home. They didn't inform me until about 9 o'clock or so, maybe even a bit later. I think this might have been because they didn't want to give me time to invite people over for a party or something. But the problem was they didn't give me any time to call anyone. This was before cell phones for the most part, so I'd have to call my friend's house phone, which was very awkward the later it got, especially on school nights. So by the time my parents told me, it was pretty much too late. I was going to be alone for the night. The first thing I thought to do is to ride my bike 2 streets over to my friend's house and see if his garage was open by chance, or if he was outside. The garage door being open was also kind of an indicator that it'd be okay to call the house a little later than normal, if it was open anyway. So I run out my back side door and around to my shed, get my bike, and ride as fast as I can. As I near his house, I can see that his garage is shut. Not only that, but it's dark, no lights on or any indication that anyone's up. Now I'm already freaking out a little bit, but I figure if I freak out, my parents will never leave me alone again. So I tell myself to suck it up and just deal with it. I get back home, put my bike away, and head inside, all the while talking to myself, trying to convince myself I wasn't scared. I come back inside the same way I went out and immediately jump onto the couch and turn on the TV. I flick through the channels and eventually find something. I don't remember what it was, but I'm sure it was a comedy as I was trying to relieve the tension of feeling alone. Anyways, probably 15 minutes later, I hear the floor creak from upstairs. Now the floor pretty much only creaked when my parents would walk into their bathroom, which was located within their master bedroom. You can blame it on the paranoia or say that I have some heightened sense of awareness to my surroundings, but I immediately felt uneasy and on high guard. So I turned down the TV a bit, not too much so it wouldn't sound suspiciously quiet from where I was, but so I could hear a bit better. I decide to creep down my hallway towards my kitchen so I can get a peek up towards my parents' room. As soon as I came to view of my parents' room, I could see shoes pass by from between the bottom of the door and the floor. Someone was inside their room, and I was too scared to find out who. I ran out the same way as before, grabbing my bike and hauling ass to my friend's house. This time I didn't care. I was ringing their doorbell frantically. It was probably around 11 or so by this time. His dad answered the door, and his face went from, "I'm going to kill whoever is at my door," to "I'm going to kill whoever is in your house," in less than 2 seconds. He had his wife call the cops and had me jump into his truck, and we took off back to my house. I was too afraid to go back inside once we got there, so he went in and let me stay in his locked truck. I explained to him how the backside door would be open and the general layout of my house, as well as where I saw the feet pass by. After what was probably 5 minutes of searching through the house, my neighbor came out my front door, unharmed and a little bewildered looking. Several minutes later, the police arrived and I told them everything that happened, and so did my neighbor. They took a look around and took our statement, and we called my parents. I stayed at my friend's house until my parents got back home, which was about 3 a.m. The next day I wake up and I can see how upset my parents are. My dad and mom are sort of arguing as I head downstairs to the kitchen. When they hear me approaching, they go quiet. I remember thinking something's not right and feeling uncomfortable again. As I get into the kitchen and start pouring cereal, my dad tells me about how his watch is missing which was a Cartier and very expensive and important to him, and how all their drawers had been rifled through very thoroughly. I felt so bad, wishing I'd had the guts to do something. I couldn't help but break out into tears. I vividly remember him telling me how smart I am and how proud he is that I handled it the way I did, and that he'd rather lose his watch than me. I finally felt safe, though I was still just crying uncontrollably. It wasn't until years later that I learned the full truth. Not only had that man stole my dad's watch, but he had also taken my mother's underwear. Not one pair, or even just a few, pretty much the whole damn lot, as well as a few bras. Also, he had pretty much taken everything out of their nightstand drawers, which I was aware was all their private stuff, though not fully sure exactly what was all in there. It really turned the creepy factor up a few after hearing that, and makes me a bit happier knowing I didn't confront him, because who knows what he would have looked like, or what he would have done. But at the same time, what's also the creepiest part is not knowing what he looked like. It lets my imagination run wild, often to the most disturbing conclusions. Regardless of who he was or what he looked like, I'm sure I never want to meet him.
Deranged intruder.
This happened a few years ago when I was still in high school, around sophomore year. After school every day, our group of friends, 4 of us, would go get something to eat and then walk back to our friend Todd's house. This was a routine for a few years by then, and continued until the first one of us got our license. Anyways, we would get out of school around 3, and usually ended up at Todd's by 4. This would leave us with about 2 hours before his parents got home, which we usually used for playing music really loud and sometimes smoking. So, needless to say, we were always in a rush to get back to his house, so we'd have a good amount of time to party. This particular day, things went a bit different. We were going about our usual routine at the usual time. After getting tacos, we were on our way back to Todd's, which was maybe a 20-minute walk. The walk went as usual and we arrived about 4 o'clock, but as soon as we got to the front door of Todd's house, things got strange. First, we noticed that his little plants and welcome mat had been moved around, but we kind of brushed it off without too much thought. After unlocking and opening the door, we noticed that there are muddy shoe prints scattered throughout the entry hall and living room. Now we are all a bit freaked out, 'cause that is not normal. But Todd doesn't really seem too freaked by it, and says his dad must have come home from work early for some reason, and to not say anything stupid in case he hears. We all agree and start heading upstairs to Todd's room. The muddy footprints continue upstairs, but instead of leading to his parents' room, like we had expected them to, they instead led to Todd's bathroom. Again, another sign that something wasn't right, and finally this time Todd agreed. He walked up to the door slowly and said, "Dad, is that you? Is everything all right?" No response. So he asked again louder, "Dad, is everything all right?" Again, no response, but this time we heard movement from within the bathroom. We all just stood there for a good 10 seconds, not sure what to do, when Todd cracks open the door and peeks inside. He immediately pulls the door shut and says, "Let's go, let's go, let's go," and starts booking it down the stairs. After a second of disbelief and just standing there dumbfounded, it clicked and we took off. I was the last one out the door, and as I got out, I realized that all three of them were still running away. This gave me the worst chill up my spine. I knew something was really not right. Finally, I caught up with them at the end of his street and was freaking out. Todd was already on the phone with the cops telling them that there is an intruder in his home and giving them his information. The cops arrive within 5 minutes and we tell them what happened and that we don't know if they are still in there. So we tell the two cops where he was and they go looking for him. Just as a third policeman shows up, the first two come walking out the front door with a handcuffed homeless man. This man was very, very, very unkempt and appeared to be completely insane. He didn't say one real word as they walked him to the car, just this unintelligible, creepy gibberish. He growled at us as he was being put into the back seat and started spitting. So after some inspection, they found that he had entered from the guest room window downstairs, which didn't have a pathway but a planter directly outside of it, hence the mud. It must have gotten watered by the automatic sprinklers minutes before he got there, 'cause it was a muddy disaster inside. After about 40 minutes of talking with Todd's dad, the cops leave. His dad tells us that we did the right thing, but I could tell he was shaken up. We still continued our routine the next day, and eventually things got back to normal, though the first few weeks after were pretty scary. Now I know a lot of you will be thinking, this is just a sad story of a man without a home, and on some levels I agree, but this man wasn't just crazy, he was angry, and after hearing that he had a knife sitting next to him on the toilet, I'm not completely convinced of his innocence. I guess the police didn't want to freak us out, but we never even saw the knife. It was only after Todd's father had told him later that day, and then he told us. The knife wasn't taken from Todd's kitchen either, which makes it that much creepier. It's possible that it was just his tool or that it was for his own protection or whatever, but regardless, not cool. So, likely deranged intruder, let's not meet.
The sound in the walls.
I was renting a basement apartment a few years back. The place sort of sucked. It was cold as hell and obviously not intended as a bedroom, with exposed cinder block for two of its walls. But hey, as a student, you take what you can get. At night, I kept hearing this scraping noise from the walls, right under my bed, sometimes slow and deliberate, and other times a sort of scattering frenzy sound. I had assumed that there was some sort of animal nesting in the wall and mentioned it to the owner. He said the foundation was improperly laid and moles and rabbits could occasionally get in between a couple of the blocks. He said he couldn't fix it before I'd moved in. I bet he says that to all of his tenants. So I just put up with it. One morning I woke up and there was dust all over the floor of my room, and a big smear of it was on the pillow next to my face, with my window wide open. The best rationalization I had at the time was I had left the window open, and maybe some dirt from the construction down the road had blown in while I was sleeping. I put it out of my mind, and life went on. From that night forward, though, I didn't hear any more scraping from the walls. Later, when I was moving out, when moving the bed out of the room, I noticed it. Underneath the bed, there were little cinder block chips and an old rusty nail spike, along with a hole in the wall about 1.5 feet wide. I still remember the feeling of spotting that. My blood turned to ice and my stomach knotted up. The hole was impossibly dark. None of the light from the room even seemed to touch it. I ran upstairs and grabbed a flashlight from one of my boxes and shoved it into the hole. There was a little crawl space, completely bricked in. No way in or out, save the newly opened hole into my room. The walls were covered with geometric patterns scraped into the brick. Squigglies, triangles, what looked like a distorted stickman. Layers and layers of them. Some faded and hardly visible, others freshly carved. The floor was covered in a thick coat of dust and little shards of rock. In the corner, there was a straw doll, stained red. I had been sleeping in this bed, inches from this, for 1.5 months. 2.5 months, mere feet from whatever the hell had been in there previously. I don't like dust anymore.
He wasn't who he said he was.
I was 18, trolling Meet Me, looking for some form of validation, and then, to my shock, I get a message from Jay. A little backstory. I went to church with Jay when I was 13. I always thought he was really cute, but he was significantly older than me. He was my best friend's older brother's best friend, so he always looked at us like we were kids. We only talked a handful of times. He left the church when I was 15 and I hadn't seen him since. Jay. Well, hello there. Me. Hey Jay, what's up? Jay. Just talking to a cute girl. What's up with you? And there it started. I was young, insecure, and slightly desperate at the time, and the idea of this amazing hot boy who I looked up to as a kid giving me that kind of attention was incredibly exciting for me. Me. You're pretty cute yourself. I've always thought so. We chatted and flirted, and flirting turned into dirty talk. By that point, it had been several hours of messaging, and it was 2 a.m. He asked to come over to my house, but I lived with my parents at the time, so I declined. He told me to give him my address anyway and that he would pick me up. But I had work in the morning, so I said no. He tried to convince me, but he finally accepted the answer. Over the next couple weeks, we messaged every day. We planned on meeting multiple times, but for some reason it never worked out for either of us. I told my friends that Jay from youth group was expressing interest in me. They were excited but told me to be careful. Jay was kind of a player. Knowing this information, I was a little hesitant to meet up with him, but I enjoyed messaging him, even though he would sometimes get upset when I told him I couldn't meet up. He got more and more persistent, so I stopped messaging him. I didn't feel right about it. Then, one Saturday, I went to a wedding with my best friend as her +1. And who would be the best man but Jay? I was excited to see him, but he acted very distant and uninterested, ignoring me like he did back in the day at church. I was sad about it, but quickly moved on to spend time with my friends. That Monday, Jay messages me again and we chat for a while. I finally decided to bring up the wedding. Me, you looked pretty hot on Saturday. Jay, you saw me on Saturday? This was strange. We had talked, only for a few minutes, but he definitely knew who I was. Me, yeah, of course I did. Jay, oh, you were at that party too? Me, what are you talking about? Jay, yeah, I was so messed up. Me, you're not Jay, are you? Jay, of course I am. What are you talking about? I realized then it wasn't Jay. In all our conversations about the past, he never brought up specific events or people. He just knew that Jay and I once knew each other. I had to be sure, so I asked him a question Jay would only know. At this wedding, the entire wedding party wore gray toms. So, I asked him, me, what shoes were you wearing on Saturday? Jay, my Vans. It wasn't him. Jay wasn't interested in me after all, but I wasn't sad. I was just scared. Who was this fake Jay? Me. You're not Jay. I don't know who you are, but you're not him. Fake Jay. Come on, of course I am. Me. Jay did not wear Vans on Saturday. Who are you? Fake Jay. Shit. Fine, I'm not Jay. Me. Who are you? Fake Jay. Ha ha. Not telling. The conversation went on a little longer and I kept getting more and more freaked out. Me. Why are you doing this? Fake Jay. Because you're an effing bitch. Me. What the hell? Who are you? Fake Jay. It was too easy. Me. I'm going to call the police. Fake Jay. They can't do anything. Me. Who are you? Fake Jay. Hope you get raped to death. He deleted his account after that. He was gone and I was terrified. At the time, I didn't do anything. I didn't even tell my parents, and I never found out who Fake Jay was. But whoever you are, let's not meet.
No more Play-Doh.
Important bit of context. This happened around 1995. In freshman year of middle school, 6th grade, there was a once-a-week group therapy session with developmentally delayed kids that involved them doing some crafts activity, or playing with Legos, or watching a movie as a group. It was half normal kids, half DD kids, and the normal kids could sign up for it. I signed up pretty much instantly as it meant an escape from history once a week. One of my best friends at the time had the same idea, and it basically turned into a second lunch period for us. The whole thing was overseen by a therapist named Bruce, and it was generally pretty laid back. Bruce was an overweight 50-ish balding guy with the attitude and general appearance of Santa Claus. He ran most of the school's extracurriculars and was pretty much universally liked. The other important player in this story was a kid who all called G. You know that stereotype of psychopaths being obsessed with animal torture as a kid? This was dead on G. He'd regularly tell these long, excited stories during group about how much fun he had last week tearing the legs off a squirrel he caught in his live trap, or other similar things. Most of us just sort of ignored him, as it was just sort of assumed that he was all talk and making up gross stuff to get attention. So one week we're playing with Play-Doh. Since it was a DD group, the huge tub of Play-Doh had long since assumed a uniform shade of turd brown, and the general drive was to get people to build things and tell stories about them. Most people just built dinosaurs or threw clay at each other. G, for whatever reason, had a huge flat square slab laid out and was building 4 large pillars on the corners. He eventually put a roof on it, which wouldn't stay on due to the lack of interior supports. The normal kids would always leave a few minutes early as the group ran right into the start of next period, and we'd need time to get to class. I was no different, and walked out while Bruce and the DD kids were smashing Play-Doh, giggling, and throwing chunks of turd dough back into the bin. I got to my next class and the teacher wasn't there. Nobody knew what was going on. About 10 minutes later, she finally showed up looking frazzled and wouldn't give us any information other than something happened that needed staff attention. Being 6th graders, we went nuts with speculation. A few hours later, I ran into the friend from group who was visibly jumpy and disturbed. He wouldn't tell me why other than mentioning that group therapy was canceled indefinitely. I kept prying for information and eventually got the story out of him. So during the cleanup, the Play-Doh had to be compacted back into its tub. This involved lots of smashing Play-Doh sculptures, a bit that the DD kids greatly enjoyed to the point where they'd try to smash other people's stuff. G's house was one of the last things to go. He smashed down 2 columns, let one of the other DDs smash another, and finally dared Bruce to smash the last one really hard. The last one with the pocket knife in it. I never saw either Bruce or G ever again.
Got harassed and followed home by a creepy stalker.
So this happened around a year ago. I was living in a large city in the UK, around a mile from the center. Although the area I lived in was nice, the city itself had a lot of crime. A teenage girl actually got stabbed to death on her way to school on a bus near my flat not long ago. I had just finished my university class and was waiting at the bus stop, and I'm helping a woman locate her bus on the timetable. And as I'm helping her, my bus pulls up and drives away. Great. A man must have seen the whole thing happen because he comes over to me and says something along the lines of, "Tough luck, that's annoying." And I reply, "Yeah, typical," or something like that. Normal small talk, trying to be polite to him. Shortly after, the next bus comes along. I get on, and so does the man I was just talking to, which I found weird as he could have gotten on the earlier bus I missed. Whatever, I don't really think much of it and put my earphones in and continue on the 20-minute journey home. I get off the bus at my normal stop and I'm walking along when suddenly I feel someone grab my shoulder. I flinch and instinctively push the hand away and look behind me, and it's the man from before. I take my headphones out and he says, "Hey, beautiful, you got a man?" My defenses immediately go up, as I'm sure any girl living in a city will understand. I start walking and he follows me. Yeah, sorry. I'm pretty bewildered at this point. I have experienced creepers before, but not someone physically grabbing me. Nah, you're just saying that. I can tell you're lying. Come on, beautiful, can I have your number? No, I have a boyfriend. I actually wasn't lying. I did have a boyfriend. He continues asking me over and over again, getting angrier and angrier at me. No, sorry. At this point, I start walking really fast, almost jogging. He's still following me. It's about a 5-minute walk to my flat, and he followed me the whole way back. I honestly think at this point I'm gonna get attacked or stabbed, or I don't know what. I've never been in this situation before, probably due to the fact I'm 5'11". Even though I only weigh 130 pounds, I've been told I look intimidating due to my height. So I get to my flat and he's followed me all the way to the doors. Luckily, I get in and shut the doors before he follows and go up to my flat. Around 30 minutes later, I go out to my balcony and look down, and he's still there. I contemplate calling the police, but instead call the concierge, and they go out and I can hear them threatening to call the police if he doesn't leave. Thankfully, he does. I spend the rest of my months living there worried if he was going to show up, and luckily he didn't. My stomach turned recently when I heard on the news that not 5 minutes from where I used to live, and this all took place, a girl was walking home late at night and she got raped. She flagged down a car for help and got raped again by a different guy. I can't imagine the horror this poor girl went through. To any girls reading this, honestly look into getting self-defense classes or something, especially if you live in a city. I'd really love to have karate chopped that guy in the dick. But seriously, I was lucky and it could have ended a lot worse. I have no idea what this guy's intentions were, if he just wanted my number or had something more sinister in mind. Be wary with who you speak. I find with men harassing women in the street, if you completely ignore them, more often than not they will stop. If they don't, or they are getting physical, a loud noise will startle them so you can run away. Invest in a rape alarm. Also, don't feel like you have to answer a man who is talking to you just to be polite in a situation like this. You don't owe them politeness. Your safety is more important.